Well, hi!
Hey!
Welcome back to Hotpocalypse. I'm Andy Cobb.
I'm Josh Willis.
And together we're here to talk to you about how we are all doomed.
Yes.
My name's Andy again. I'm a comic who is chronically depressed and is convinced we're all doomed.
And I'm a climate scientist who's crunched the numbers and knows we're doomed.
Mm-hmm. Empirical evidence and combining alcohol with antidepressants. But we both reach the same conclusions. We are very excited to be talking to you today because, it's kind of a hot topic.
It is, yeah.
What's happening in the Midwest right now.
Right, that's right. Actually, the Midwest is really suffering right now. There's been this enormous flood. It really began with something called a bomb cyclone, which hit last week.
Yeah. As an old person, I'm just learning to use the word bomb as an adjective.
Right.
But I'm guessing this isn't a good one. This is,
No.
It's not the totally bomb cyclone.
It's not. So we're going to talk about that, and we're also very excited to have a special guest on the show today. Nebraska Democratic Party Chair Jane Kleeb is here, and she's going to talk with us a little bit about what's going on in Nebraska. And all kinds of other cool stuff too.
And we're super excited to talk to Jane. Jane has been sort of a climate hero of mine for quite a while now. And I think Jane will probably get into some of the nuts and bolts of of how she sort of assumed a mantle of leadership in the climate movement. I'm going to go ahead and say that if I were faced with the same situation Jane was faced in, I think I'd do the traditional climate move of bringing together a bunch of hippies, putting them in a circle, giving them all drums and marijuana, and letting them beat down a drum circle beat until they raised enough awareness to stop the problem.
It's always worked in the past.
How could it fail? But let's see if Jane had a different approach to climate issues.
Yeah.
Hi, Jane.
Hi, Jane.
Hey there. Yes, we had a slightly different approach. We had an unlikely alliance. We had plenty of tree huggers and hippies, but that was not the main focus.
It's so exciting. You really created this whole movement out in Nebraska. Can you just tell us a little bit of the genesis of that and how that all came about and what happened with it?
Yeah, so we were faced with the Keystone XL pipeline. So for folks who may not know or may have forgotten, since it's now been a 10-year battle, this was a maximum capacity tar sands pipeline coming from Alberta, Canada, going through Montana, South Dakota, Nebraska, down to the coast in order for Alberta to ship their tar sands off to Asia and other markets. So, this was sold to everybody as American pie and American flag, that this was going to get us off Saudi Arabia and Venezuelan oil, and just sign here and everything will be perfectly fine. I really didn't have a climate background at all. I had never worked on pipelines, knew nothing about eminent domain. I didn't even know the word tar sands, but I knew farmers and ranchers because my husband's in the cattle business, and they started to call me, ask me if I had heard about this pipeline. So we started to organize farmers and ranchers. I am a political organizer, so I definitely knew how to organize. And then we started to work about a year later with tribal nations, and it became this really unlikely alliance of farmers, ranchers, environmentalists, and tribal nations all coming together because we had a common cause, and we did a lot of creative actions in order to build trust with one another. And I really think that the model that we have here in Nebraska and in South Dakota is a model not only for other environmental fights, but is quite frankly a model for the Democratic Party to start winning in rural communities again.
Bazang. Wow. Bazang is what I have to say. That's great. And really that unusual coalition that you formed, I think is really at the heart of what makes that so remarkable, surprising, and compelling as a story. Is we hear so much about red states and blue states. Here in what is generally considered a very red state, you've created this very purple coalition.
Yeah. So I have a question. What brought all those people together? What about the Keystone Pipeline really united them all?
What's remarkable is I think sometimes people look at farmers and ranchers and they don't consider them environmentalists, when in fact they would never describe themselves probably as environmentalists. They use words like land stewards and taking care of the land and making sure the land is protected in order to pass on to their kids and their grandkids. But they have the same principles, that they want to protect it, that they want it kept in the family's hands, that they don't believe in industrial corporate agriculture. So there's a lot of similar values when it comes to rural folks, as well as kind of, coastal progressives, if you will. So when they started, let me just say this one thing. When they started to fight the pipeline, climate change wasn't at the top of their list. They talked about protecting the Ogallala Aquifer, which is our main water source, protecting their property rights from a foreign corporation using eminent domain. Obviously, the tribes talked about their sovereign rights. Really, though, it wasn't until literally 3 years into the fight did folks start to use the word climate change. And that was because myself as an organizer, people like Bill McKibben, other folks in the National Environmental Movement, they never shied away that was one of the big reasons they were fighting the pipeline. So it was a really kind of give and take and learning experience for everybody involved.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I have a question about the farming community. So is the small farm and kind of individual farmer still a big part of the landscape there and the community? It's not all giant corporate farms?
Yeah, so in Nebraska, it still is, although industrial ag and corporate ag is definitely breathing down our neck. So if you enjoy the $5 chickens at Costco, you are part of the problem. Stop buying those. Buy from local farmers directly if you want delicious chicken. So we did have a bill put in place by Senator Nelson, who was then the governor, that actually banned corporate farms in industrial agriculture in the state of Nebraska. When Republicans took control about 20 years ago, they reversed that, unfortunately. So, but there's still a very strong and deep tradition of family farms in Nebraska. A lot of the land is still in family farmers and family ranchers. So we still have that culture. Iowa, I think, is kind of more moving towards corporate agriculture. Both hogs and chickens have really dominated in Iowa. We're trying to stop a lot of that. Costco, unfortunately, is coming in. They are going into one of the communities, quite frankly, that's been hit by the flood. So I'm going to be curious to see how in recent months or the next couple of months, how that's going to go. But they want to process up to 1 million birds a day. So if you can imagine how many massive chicken barns they need. They won't be free-range chickens by any stretch of the imagination, and all the waste and strain that's going to put it on the water infrastructure in that community. So it is a big red flag that we have in Nebraska.
Man, that is so interesting, Jane, and it really drives home something that I think we've been seeing a lot as we've been discussing these issues, is this sort of intersectionality of these different issues. How something like climate and a clean water supply, how those things are tied together and tied into issues like corporate farming, like the way that the capital treats food resources, and things like this. It's really remarkable to see these creative solutions that folks are coming up with in their own areas. As a great example of this, could you talk about something that you created, something that you built to help stop the pipeline?
So TransCanada has these awful one-sided contracts that essentially tells a landowner that they cannot build anything inside the pipeline route. So we took that on as a challenge. We decided we are going to build something inside the pipeline route, and we're going to make it the type of energy that we want to see and a symbol of our rural culture. So the first structure that we built inside the route is a solar barn. So we built it all by hand. All materials came from the United States of America. It has solar panels on it, as well as a small windmill. And we raised and crowdsourced the money. So that barn, cost us about $60,000. And it still is kind of a focus. We hold lots of events there. We've turned the barn over to the Hammond family that is now using it as a tool shed as they're on their working mixed kind of corn, soybeans, and agricultural land of cows. So it's a beautiful symbol, we think. And it was actually a direct message to President Obama, who at the time was actually waffling. It's hard to imagine that now, but he was waffling on whether or not to approve the pipeline. We literally told him, listen, if you approve Keystone XL, you will have to tear down not only a barn that symbolizes rural America, but you'll have to tear down clean energy in order to put a foreign tar sands pipeline in the ground. And then we decided to take it a step further. So we have built solar arrays all along the route as well. We continue to raise money on boldnebraska.org for that project, where we build solar arrays inside the route as well. And the power goes directly to the family farm or the family ranch.
Oh, it's so good. It just is like form following function. It's just, it's such brilliant and effective activism.
I love that. It's really cool. I didn't realize that it was a solar. It's basically a solar power plant too. That's amazing.
And it's such a great like local solution to a local problem in the sense that like let's fight this with a barn raisin. Like it's such a elegant way to approach it. I love it.
Yeah. So, Jane, I wanted to ask you a little bit about what's going on right now in Nebraska. I understand that there was this huge storm that happened this week, and from what I understand, it's come at the end of a big snowy winter that was very cold, froze the ground, has caused a lot of runoff and huge amounts of flooding and a lot of devastation.
We are in serious trouble right now. So we were facing already a ton of moisture through snow, ice, and rain over the last several months, on top of increased property taxes, where you have farmers and ranchers literally having to take out loans for $50,000 just to pay the ridiculously high property taxes under this awful Republican governor, Governor Ricketts. On top of that, you had the tariffs and the trade war that Trump has put on top of family farmers and ranchers. And so they were already on razor thin, if not at all, any margins. And bankruptcies had increased 20% across the Midwest under President Trump. So all of that was already very bad. And we were already seeing families really hurting. And nobody talking about this, by the way, because one of the biggest problems is we don't have, John Tester essentially is a tractor caucus of one, right? There's no Democratic senators other than Tester that comes from an ag background. And then you have some Republicans that might come from an ag background, but they're so removed from that and so in the pocket of corporate lobbyists that they don't talk about the interests of farmers and ranchers. So you really don't have anybody advocating for them in Washington, D.C. So that is where the starting place was. And then you had this historic flood, which was supposed to be a 200-year flood. But you talk to all the old timers and they're like, look, these floods are coming every 20 years, not every 200 years. So we now have over $500 billion in crop loss, over $500 million in livestock. So almost $1 billion crop and livestock loss already. And that surely will go up. So we haven't even really solved the fundamental problem that farmers and ranchers were already facing. And now on top of it, this historic flood, it is bad. So that's the farmers and the ranchers. And then you have tribes like the Ponca Nation and the Santee Nation that are completely flooded in Norfolk or up in northern Nebraska, who are desperately needing water and food supplies and cleaning up. So we are looking at a very long haul. The one group that I will say that I think has stepped up and always steps up is the Farmers Union. The Farm Bureau has stepped up, as well as, the Farm Aid, which Willie Nelson started. They immediately started reaching out and making sure that there was a hotline, not only for financial help, but for the emotional help and all the stress that folks are now going to be facing.
Wow.
So I understand, in addition, that there's an expectation that as the huge amount of snow that melt over the spring all that snow starts to melt, that these floods could continue. Are you hearing anything in the way of help from the federal government or declarations of emergency?
You're exactly right. So not only all the pileup of snow, but you have these huge blocks of ice. If you just go on Google or on Facebook, you can start to see these images that, ranchers have started to put up, that they're literally putting kind of on the shores. And in the beginning, when we were getting all this snow, you would talk to some of the ranchers and they would say, we're just happy for the moisture because, the sandhills act as a big sponge for the Ogallala Aquifer, which then provides water not only for the state of Nebraska, but for surrounding states. And so it's been this beautiful ecosystem, but now it's under all this stress and obviously way too much water, which is then leading to the flooding. So we are worried about planting season, which we're about to come up to, and the ground is going to be way too moist. So we couldn't sell product because of Trump's tariffs this cycle. Now it's going to be late when people can plant. Next time the ground is going to be too wet. We lost lots of calves and cows and other livestock. So this is a serious issue. Pence did come a couple days ago to the state of Nebraska. President Trump is too busy making fun of Senator John McCain, a war hero.
His dance card's full with that stuff. It's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, he tweeted like once 5 days ago, but President Obama at least, tweets a link to resources that people can tap into. And President Trump doesn't even have the dignity to do that or share images of first responders who are working day and night and farmers and ranchers who are working day and night, literally to use tractors to get cows out of the mud that are stuck. So I'm just disgusted with President Trump. He uses farmers and ranchers as props at his rallies and then does nothing to help them.
It's really stunning, and I got to say, I'm just a little bit surprised that the neglect of the federal government has been so egalitarian in a sense. That like when we were talking about if we're Katrina and this is Kanye West and I'm Mike Myers, we should be saying President Trump does not care about.
How come I don't get to be Mike Myers?
It's years of training. President Trump doesn't care about people. Instead of black people, as Kanye West, it just seems to be a lack of humanity being reflected here, rather than some sort of racial or class-based maliciousness that seemed to be the case in Katrina. This just seems to be not caring about the constituents, many of whom probably helped elect him at some point.
Yeah, I have to ask. There's clearly a lot of suffering, and this is a very deeply red state. And I'm just wondering, are people starting to get tired of this kind of treatment and neglect?
This is this big issue that we have to solve, right? And so I am in the middle of writing a book precisely about this issue, because what I hear from a lot of my progressive friends, and I grew up on the coast, right? I didn't grow up in a farming community, but I've lived now in Nebraska for over 12 years. My husband's in the cattle business. Obviously, I spent a lot of time with farmers and ranchers because of pipeline fights, not only in Nebraska, but all across the country. And what I often hear my friends on the coast say to me is, well, they're getting what they deserve, right? They voted for Trump and they continue to vote for Republicans. And so I don't really care. And the rural populations are dying off anyway. So who cares?
Oh my.
The reality is, and this is what I hear, and you hear it on Twitter. Sure. The reality is, we won't elect a Democratic president without rural communities. And I won't, and we won't be able to change the state of Nebraska by electing good statewide elected officials, because we elect plenty of Democrats in our urban centers already in our state. But we won't be able to elect good statewide people unless we close the gap in our rural communities. But it's not enough that Trump is a jerk and that Trump is heartless and that Trump is putting all of these really bad policies in place. Because as an old timer once told my husband, if you only have one church in your community, guess what religion you become? So as Democrats, we have failed to show up on a consistent basis and build authentic and true relationships and really invest in our rural communities. I will tell you, as a chair of a red state, and I know I speak for lots of other chairs of red states, the amount of resources that we get from the National Democratic Party is very little. And so it's already difficult enough, but it's almost like you need to reverse the funding cycle that we're in. You need to give the blue states the money that the red states are getting and give the red states the money that the blue states are getting if you actually want to start winning elections.
Jane, I am getting fired up listening. When do I get to vote for Jane? When does this happen?
I'm not ready. I'm not ready.
That's so interesting, and there's so many things we want to talk to you about here. I feel like we're going to need to pick our battles to a certain extent because we only got so much time. But I'd love to know more about this red state, blue state divide. Just in terms, the divide is probably the wrong word for it, but this distinction in the sense that right now we're hearing a lot of talk about the Electoral College among national Democrats and the idea of getting away with doing away with the Electoral College or changing it. How do you feel about that, and how would that strike you and the people that you work with and love?
Well, Nebraska and Maine are super cool. So we don't just grant our electoral votes as one big sum. So we have a split of our electoral votes. And so Barack Obama, in fact, won an electoral vote in our 2nd congressional district. And so that's what I would like to see. I would like to see each congressional district being able to give their electoral votes to a presidential candidate. So it's much more fair based on that congressional district and the makeup of that district. If we do away completely with the Electoral College, if you think Nebraska is a flyover state now, I can only imagine what it's going to look like if we're just relying on votes from the big states. And I get, right, the big states have a lot of power, they have a lot of money, but we grow the food that's on your table. So we should matter too.
Word up.
Yeah.
Word
And we love that food, yes.
I'm a big fan. And Jane, and maybe we can just give, I'd like to ask you some questions about the Green New Deal and sort of the larger climate issue. But I wonder if Josh can real quick give us a little bit of climate context as a scientist. What climate-wise is driving or perhaps contributing to the flooding that Jane's seeing in her community right now?
Well, look, there's a few things that we know very, very well in terms of climate change and global warming. We know the planet is heating up, and we also know that warming is caused by human activity, by the burning of fossil fuels and adding CO2 to the atmosphere. Now, as the climate warms, of course, the temperature goes up. That's sort of a no-brainer, and that we know really well. But other things happen too, and one of the things that's predicted to happen and appears to be actually playing out is that the atmosphere can hold more water. So warm air holds more water, and that means that it can create much stronger downpours. And also that generally speaking, the climate is more unsettled, that the variations in climate from 1 week to the next, essentially our weather, is getting more extreme. And we are beginning to see that. It's beginning to become obvious. So, often climate scientists say, well, you can't blame every storm on global warming, and that's certainly true. Weather's always been here. It's always been a wild ride, but it's getting wilder.
Yeah, man.
It's definitely getting wilder.
Yeah, like the Six Flags rides. It's getting wilder.
Yeah.
So Jane, with that sort of context, I know you've been in the climate fight since most of us were in short pants doing the good work. Can you just talk to us a little bit about, as a Democrat, as a leader of the Democratic Party, what the Green New Deal means to you in terms of this climate fight, if you think it's a good fit for the people of Nebraska, and how it lends into your larger efforts?
So I love the concept of the Green New Deal, and I love a lot of the components that Representative Ocasio-Cortez has put in it, along with Representative Merkley and Representative Markey. So it's clearly one strong, very bold proposal on the table. And I know that Speaker Pelosi and many other Democrats are looking to put other climate proposals on the table. For me, there's a couple of things that have to be obvious. One, we cannot continue to build out new fossil fuel infrastructure. You can't solve climate change by just building a whole bunch of clean energy and still allowing new fossil fuel infrastructure to be built. So totally fine to use the fossil fuel infrastructure that we currently have. I get it. We're still driving cars mostly on gas, et cetera, right? So let's start there. Don't freak out anybody who's watching. We're not going to turn, natural gas and oil off tomorrow. But we can't build new pipelines. We can't build new coal plants. So we have to agree with that. Second, for me, you have to say no eminent domain. The fact that these big corporations continue to use eminent domain, not only on rural farmers and ranchers, but on poor Black, Latino, Native American communities, we've got to stop that. Whether you're a big wind farm or a big pipeline, you should not have eminent domain rights, because we should be deciding as communities together that we are in this together, that we are going to build these projects. We're going to site them properly. We're going to have decommissioning plans in place. We're going to have profit sharing for the people whose land these projects are being built on. So those are some things that are missing in the Green New Deal. I clearly have been talking to, especially Representative Merkley from Oregon, making sure that he's at the table getting these pieces in there. But I'm quite frankly disgusted with Republicans who try to villainize, but I'm not surprised, but disgusted by Republicans who try to villainize Representative Ocasio-Cortez, because she is actually putting something on the table and leading. And I wish more members of Congress, quite frankly, would follow her lead.
Boom.
Yeah.
Boom. Booyah, as the kids say. And Jane, if you might talk about one element of the Green New Deal that I think has been misrepresented a lot in the media. I've been told by Dana Rohrabacher and some other folks that they're coming to take our cheeseburgers. Is this true?
Yes.
Is Hamburglar going to come to me in the night? Should I be worried?
Okay, so I was born around hamburgers. It was probably like fate that I was going to marry a cattle rancher. My grandmother started one of the first Burger Kings down in Florida, so I love myself a hamburger. The Green New Deal says nothing about taking away hamburgers. It is unfortunate that a young staffer put together some talking points that I'm sure they thought was funny at midnight when they were writing them. And so the Republicans have grabbed onto that. It's not in the bill. They probably had one too many beers when they were writing the talking points. So they make fun of farting cows. And this is something that Republicans have done too. Lee Terry, who's been defeated in our state, he used to make fun of farting cows on the floor of Congress as well. It's stupid. To say that cows are the reason that we have climate change is absolutely ridiculous. It wasn't helped when individuals like Senator Booker then did an interview. He's a vegan, great, your choice.
Sure.
But he did an interview talking about how one way we can help solve climate change is for people to become vegetarians and vegans. Not helpful for the cattle industry, not helpful for rural communities that we're trying to bring to the table. So for me, it's not about getting rid of agriculture. It certainly is putting a handle on corporate and industrial ag. And then it's really helping support family farmers so we can continue to support local food ecosystems.
Great.
Yeah,
man.
Yeah. I think it's funny. We often forget, a lot of it is about investment, right? I mean, we invest in infrastructure for the future, and right now we're investing in more fossil fuels, and it's just simply a matter of trying to take those investments that are in fossil fuels and put them toward renewables.
And you're talking about the subsidies for oil companies and whatnot.
I mean, things like eminent domain. There's all kinds of ways we kind of give we prop up the oil industry with the government, all kinds of benefits, bennies, right? They call them. Yeah. So it's just a matter of kind of shifting those towards something that makes more sense.
Yeah, the entitlements are going the wrong way in that scenario. That's great. I believe we have some audience questions. Is that correct? And by the way, we are on the Being Liberal Facebook website right now. We know that we've got a lot of viewers, and please feel free to comment, question. We're going to be looking at them live. And you've got an actual climate scientist, you've got an actual effective politician, activist in the climate movement, and you've got an actual dick joke teller in the climate movement.
He is
all
so
at your
good
disposal.
at that.
Anything
amazing.
I can create into a dick joke. It's like a stoner with a bomb. But
We always
if you have
need
any
that.
questions, I think we'll go ahead and face them. Oh, okay. This
Yeah.
is great.
How can we help Nebraska? A question I have too.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. There's a couple ways. One, farmers are getting direct aid from Farm Aid, so that's a good website to go to if you wanted to give a financial donation. You can also give to the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska, so you can just Google Ponca Tribe of Nebraska. Their website will come up. They have a donate link for all of the recovery that they're having to do with the flood. And then the third one I would say is if you want to help with the rebuild process and you want to help really develop more clean energy, you can give to Bold Nebraska. So if you go to boldnebraska.org, we have our Solar Excel project up. I've already talked to the chairman of the Ponca Nation as well as a couple of the mayors whose towns have been flooded. And we've committed to raising money to build solar in those communities as much as we can. So those are three ways. And really just keep on tweeting and Facebook messaging about it. We want to know that people outside of the Midwest care about us and know that we exist. And that's really important as well.
Boy, and I would imagine it's a little bit depressing sometimes to turn on the news with all that's going on in your community right now and not see that much of it on the national news. So certainly that sort of helping with awareness and exposure can be useful here. Jane, if you were to say that a website, the Bold Nebraska website, 3 times in a row, what would that sound like?
So it'd be boldnebraska.org, boldnebraska.org, boldnebraska.org.
She nailed it. She
Wow.
nailed it. That's exactly right.
Amazing.
That's exactly what that sounds like in my mind. That's terrific. And I'm told we have another question that we'd like to address. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, just give me 1 second.
I'm sorry, we're having a little technical trouble.
Mike, our producer, is finding us a
Producer
question.
Mike.
Producer
Go
Mike.
by really fast.
But we do want to just emphasize that you can find us on Facebook at Hotpocalypse. Please like us and follow us. You can also find us on Twitter. You can find us on SoundCloud. You can find us on YouTube. I'll bet we're on LinkedIn.
We could be. I would never know.
Good for you. He's got a job. He doesn't need one. So I think that we also want to say with Jane and all this stuff that you're doing, we want to keep track of what you do because we think you're awesome. And I joked about being able to vote for you sometime in the near future. If I weren't to be joking, I would say that for real. What would that sound like?
So I, sometimes do get asked if I'm going to run for office, and I'm an organizer. I love also the internal party politics because I believe in state parties and our national party structure. So there's a possibility that I'll run for either DNC chair or one of the DNC vice chair spots when they come up at the end of the 2020 cycle. I don't see myself ever running for U.S. Senate or governor. I'm more of an organizer and a party person, so I'm going to stick where I think my skills are best.
That's great, and that's exactly what I expect a future senator to say. So that's perfect. No, that's terrific. And if you could just talk generally about the national party for a second. We're going to be seeing, we've seen a lot of primary candidates, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot more. You probably might not be comfortable giving an endorsement per se. I don't know that that's necessary. But in terms of their stances on the climate, are there any particular policies or stances that you're excited about from the current crop of primary candidates, things that got your attention?
I was actually on the DNC's Unity and Reform Commission, and one of the things that we worked hard was making sure that state party chairs, and we've even gone a step further in Nebraska and asked our county chairs to remain neutral. So I am proudly neutral in the presidential cycle, which quite frankly, in this very crowded, great field of candidates is a very good place to be. All of them do have strong climate backgrounds. Governor Hickenlooper clearly governed over a lot of fracking in his years as governor, and so I'm sure that he will be asked a lot of questions on the trail about that. Beto and Bernie Sanders have both spoke about eminent domain and making sure that property rights are protected. Bernie Sanders in particular has done a lot with tribal nations. There's no candidate that I wouldn't be proud to vote for. We had Mayor Pete here in Nebraska a couple years ago, and I think he is shocking everybody whenever he gets on stage or gets in front of a microphone. He really turns people and makes people aware. Senator Warren, Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar. We are blessed with a lot of good candidates, and now we may have VP Biden jumping in and might even be a Biden-Abrams ticket right out of the gate. So I think there's a lot of excitement.
Exciting.
Yeah. So it's crazy.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, it is a embarrassment of riches to a certain extent with these candidates right now. I think we've got one more common question that we were going to look at, Mike. Is that right?
Yeah. Can we bottle cow farts for energy?
The readers of Being Liberal not letting us down today.
Yes,
Thank you for your
I'm glad that
question.
there was a fart joke. Yes, that fart jokes are always good, but I will say that there are some very ingenious and innovative ranchers that use manure for energy. So that is happening.
I heard a very interesting story the other day also.
Ooh, Johnny Deep State has something to say.
Right. I read that that there's some new research that suggests that certain types of seaweed being introduced into cows' diets might reduce their production of methane by like 50%. And
yes,
they would look cool while eating it.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow, I like that. We should feed We did feed some of that to my my infant daughter.
Yeah.
She has some methane issues, you guys. She's her carbon footprint is outsized. Hey, you guys, I think we're nearing the end of our time, and I just want to say thank you so much, Jane. What a great burst of information from such an exciting and compelling person. That was great. We really appreciate
really
it.
happy to have you here, Jane.
And if you were to say that website 3 more times, what would that sound like?
That would be boldnebraska.org, boldnebraska.org, boldnebraska.org. And that site will have this book. It'll be out by the time of the Iowa caucus, knock on wood, if I can get my writing down that the editors want me to. So hopefully that will also open a window to rural America for the Progressive Democratic Party.
Awesome. It's not like you have anything else to do, am I right? Thank you so much, Jane. That we really appreciate it.
Yeah, Nebraska Democratic Chair Jane Kleeb, everybody, our very special and very friendly guest. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you, Jane. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And Josh, hey, thank you, buddy.
Yeah.
Here we are at the end of another episode.
I know, we did it.
We did it. We did another one. I didn't drop one F-bomb that entire time.
Oh, you were such a good boy, Andy.
And you didn't reveal your relationship with the deep state, so we both did what we set out to do.
No one knows.
Like us on Facebook, like us on Twitter, like us on YouTube. Follow us, darn it. And SoundCloud, what else do we got? Mike, producer Mike, is there anything else people should follow us on?
Hotpocalypse.com.
Hotpocalypse.com.
That'll send you wherever we want you to go.
Hotpocalypse.com. Please check us out, and please leave your comments here on Being Liberal, and Josh or I or Jane or someone will try and get to them before we see you again next week.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Take care, guys.